Steve, awesome to see you. Thank you for joining us. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely, Pete. It's good to see you again as well.
Hey everyone, you are super pumped because I'm wearing my sales nerd hoodie today, but the big sales nerd is on the other side of the screen right here. You guys are super pumped to have Steve Silver here from Forrester to give us a presentation on all sorts of amazing modern sales and revenue operations insights, because that's kind of Steve's job. So. Super pumped to be covering this here today. We're going to talk about, modern sales topics that Steve pays attention to at Forrester. I'm going to give a little bit of a chat regarding some of the advances in large language model, generative AI that we've been working on at Atrium. And so hopefully you guys will be, very educated and sales nerdified after this session. And then you can go to the next session for MSP's virtual summit. So just really quick in terms of introductions, my name is Pete Kazanjy. I am one of the founders of Atrium. We make a AI-driven sales effectiveness platform that helps sales organizations better manage and improve the performance of their sales reps through the better application of data. Prior to Atrium, I started a recruiting software company called TalentBin that was acquired by Monster Worldwide in 2014. And subsequent to that, that's really where I went from being like a business generalist founder to being our first seller, and then a sales manager, and then a sales leader at TalentBin. And that's really where I kind of started to really appreciate the concept of modern sales, like analytically excellent, operationally rigorous, modern sales. Wrote a book on sales for startups subsequent to that called Founding Sales, and then started Modern Sales Pros as well. So that's a little bit on me. Steve, maybe you can give folks a little bit of an introduction on yourself, not just like what you spend your time on at Forrester, but maybe a little bit of your kind of background before that, and before we get into your presentation.
Yeah, I do have one question before I do that, though. You're not actually going to make me do some disco moves here, are you?
I mean, only if you want to. Only if you want to. Up to you.
It's been a while since
surprise us.
Disco in my activities. Anyway, thanks again, Pete. It's a pleasure to chat with you. So I'm currently a VP Research Director at Forrester, and I'm responsible for sort of all things sales operations, and now, of course, revenue operations. Yep. I've been with Forrester now for 5 years. Before that was Serious Decisions and came over as part of the acquisition. But before that, the last 20 years really spent as a sales and sales operations practitioner. Yep. So yes, I have carried a bag way back in the day with MCI Communications. Ran a sales region for them, then moved over into sales operations. And I've been doing that for the last 25 plus years.
Wow.
For some very large companies, Quest Communications, Storage Tech, as well as for a couple of startups. So, moving into this role as an analyst and an advisor to clients has really allowed me to sort of leverage that knowledge and continue to build my knowledge, because we talk to a lot of providers, we talk to a lot of end users, we study the marketplace, and we try to help our clients, and by extension, your team, the people listening to this, understand kind of what's going on in this world of sales and revenue operations.
Yeah, I mean, and you're in the catbird seat, because people bang down your door trying to show you new stuff, and so you can sit there agglomerating information and insight. Yeah. Man, I guess I just didn't realize that you'd have been in sales operations for 20 years. That spans the gamut from pre-CRM. Siebel-ish, when people were going from Act Goldmine, right, contact managers to actual server client with Siebel, even before Salesforce, and then of course the Salesforce ecosystem and all of that. So man, yes, you have a lot of perspective to show.
Yeah, I've seen some of the good and bad. Made a lot of mistakes, and as you know, we learn best from our mistakes. So hopefully I'm able to bring a little bit of that wisdom, at least, to some of our clients and listeners today.
I love it. Love it. Well, let's get into your talk here.
Yeah. And as you know, Pete, we'll make this interactive. I had a couple of slides to sort of guide our conversation, if you will, thinking about, of course, B2B sales, AI, generative AI, what's happening with buyers, what's happening with sellers. How is this whole brave new world going to change what we all do as sales and sales operations and revenue operations professionals?
Yeah.
And not so jokingly, I was kind of thinking about, when I first got into sales, when I first took on a role as a sales operations leader, there was a lot of relationship selling. And, part of my budget was, hey, you've got to take a certain number of clients to lunch. You've got to get them on the golf course. You've got to go visit them where they live. I mean, and forecasts were all about guts and intuition and instinct. And it worked for some sellers, but it was really hard and still is really hard to sort of take that native seller intuition and transfer that into a larger organization. And it shouldn't be any surprise to anyone that this era is ending. And we're now very focused on selling with insights, with precision, with really understanding who are our buyers, what problems are we solving for them, why would they buy from us, why would they not buy from us, who's our target market, how do we automate a lot of these sales functions. And I think we've always wanted to do this. We've just never really had the capability to do it until now, right?
Can I share a funny haha with you
that I think
that you might appreciate? And hopefully I haven't told this story before and everyone will roll their eyes. I'm like turning to that old guy who says the same stories every time. So when I was doing research for Atrium, because back in 2016, 2017, when we were doing our initial research for Atrium, I interviewed a bunch of sales operations leader around how they use data in order to better measure and manage performance in sales orgs. And there's this gentleman named RJ Vissers, who's a similarly seasoned sales operations professional to you. And I think at the time he might have been at Coupa or he might have been at Aptus. I can't remember which one. But anyway, he was like, oh, Pete, back in the day, I knew exactly who was going to hit their number and who wouldn't. I was like, oh yeah? Well, how? He's like, expense reports. I was like, oh, really? He's like, yep. I could instrument people based on their expense reports because even though I had no information as to the actual number of meetings that they were having, because this was pre-Siebel CRM, right? Even though I had no idea how many actual customer-facing meetings and what have you were actually happening, I was blind to that until deals started showing up. I did have a proxy for that behavior, which was breakfast receipts, lunch receipts, dinner receipts. And he was the important thing was it was number of expense reports. It wasn't magnitude. Because sometimes what managers will do is I want to make sure you need to be using up your T&E budget. It's yeah, but you need to be using up your T&E budget $50 at a time, not blowing it all, in one fell swoop for, at $1,000 at the end of the quarter or what have you. And so I thought that was really insightful mechanism of instrumenting golf and steak dinners.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, we do it a lot better now, but I just thought that was hysterical when he told me that. I was like, oh my gosh, you are a clever mad scientist, RJ.
Well, that's really relevant in a lot of ways because it is absolutely true then, and it's still true now that activity yields results, right? If you don't do the activity, if you aren't calling on customers, if you aren't meeting with them, if you aren't advancing opportunities, well, you're unlikely to get results that are very, shall we say, favorable or oriented towards long-term life at that company. Yep. On the other hand, I think we're getting so much smarter about what the right activities are with the right customers and the right messaging. And so if you're going to go on those trips and you're going to take customers to lunch and dinner, make sure it's the right customers who are in the middle of an active buying cycle or renewal cycle and that you're actually doing the activities that yield to the results you want.
Yep.
So with that kind of as background, let's talk a little bit about sort of the state of sales technology and maybe the state of sales as broader market trends. And I kind of put it in these three buckets. And I'm really curious as I talk through this, Pete, to get your reaction, what you're seeing.
Yep.
First is sort of in that consolidation and integration column, because the 20 teens, if I'm saying that correctly, were really kind of the decade of more.
Yeah.
more tools, more technology, more vendors in the marketplace, just this explosion of vendors getting funded and ideas getting funded and growth in terms of capabilities. But now, as we're in the early 2020s decade, there's a couple of factors that are causing that to change. And one, of course, is macroeconomic conditions. I mean, we all know private equity money, venture capital money is getting more expensive. They are looking for companies that show a path to profitability. They're not interested in, gee, how many features and functions do you have? They really want to know, what's your business plan? How are you going to get there? What problem do you solve for your customers? And vendors and providers of sales technology, rightfully so, are building overlapping capabilities. Everybody has a roadmap. Everybody's integrating AI, and sort of the third major factor there is on the budget side from buyers. And this is one of the drivers for revenue operations. They really want to look across the entire sort of customer-facing tech stack, if you will. And so we're seeing integration in things. Marketing automation is starting to look a little more like sales automation, and you've got customer success factored in there, and the intelligence they get and the reports they get. We're taking a much more holistic view across this technology. So I'm curious if you're seeing that as well, Pete.
Oh, totally. I mean, I think it's just like S curves, right? Like, you've been doing this long enough where at a certain point, like the crux of whatever the innovative technology was, kind of like the juice gets squeezed out of it. Like, let's use sales engagement as an example, right? Like the automated sending of emails by an individual is very helpful. And then, of course, like maybe like putting some governance around that and putting some integrations around that and what have you is also very helpful to kind of like continue to drive value. But at a certain point, it's like, how many different ways can we send emails automatically? And at that point, like incremental features or incremental engineering investment starts, not being necessarily worth the time. And so that's where like people start kind of creeping into each other's into each other's space. And like there's definitely a risk in overbuilding and then overcharging for that as well. Same with like conversation intelligence, where it's like, hey, look, man, like at the end of the day, recording my reps' calls such that they can go back and like find out, remember when the CFO is coming back from maternity leave, like that's kind of like the core use case for like a primary core use case for call recording. I don't need to pay you $120 a month for that. I can get that for $30. So I think that's why like people are kind of like getting into each other's lunchbox a little bit,
Absolutely. And as industry analysts, we really want to say, oh, you're a CPQ tool and you are a conversation intelligence tool and you are a sales engagement tool. But those lines are absolutely blurring and rightfully so. And that kind of leads us actually to this second trend, which is no surprise to anyone. I think it's AI everywhere, whether it's generative AI, large language models, machine learning, deep machine learning, pick your AI acronym of choice. Everyone is making announcements about integrating AI into their tools. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about that, but it's the example you gave about conversation intelligence is a good one, because vendors who are leveraging AI, I'll say correctly or in creative ways, are going beyond just recording it and saying, well, what can we learn from this? How can we analyze this conversation and all the other conversations that are happening in order to give those actionable insights to the sales rep, right? And to the revenue operations and the sales leaders. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that AI everywhere and what some of the drivers are. The third big, I think, trend here is this idea of demand for value. And especially as you see that sort of budget compression amongst buyers and users, they're asking vendors, tell me how we're going to measure the impact of this solution, and tell me how you're going to help me get those positive impacts. And that's not new necessarily, but I think it's risen in importance as sales ops leaders and revenue operations leaders look across their tech stack and go, this feels too complicated and it feels too expensive and I'm paying too much and I'm not sure I'm getting value from it. And so you've got this, this push for value from both investors and executives and users. So if we agree that those are sort of three big trends, it's a little bit of a good news, bad news story, right? The good news is, and we've seen this consistently, that sales operations leaders are still willing to spend money on technology, right? They are excited about the buzz around AI. Many of them are seeing positive results from that. Balancing that is the feedback we get from the salespeople themselves. And, by survey standards, 53% sounds like a lot, but that means 47% are not getting the value that they should be getting from technology. And so, when you look at, well, how much are we spending on it and how much are end users actually using it or getting value from it, there's still a bit of an imbalance there. So again, I'm curious if you're seeing that with the folks that you're talking to.
Well, I certainly see it in bucket number one, because we've been doing a bunch of work layering AI on top of Atrium's core functionality, and I think you're exactly right. You see that across where it's almost like it benefits the existing solutions, because a lot of the stuff ends up being like a heavy lift to implement, from an engineering and a product standpoint. And that, so you have to do that, use Atrium as an example. We have to have a data pipeline to hook into organizations, CRMs and email and calendar systems. And we have to, pull that data and prepare it and categorize it and do all sorts of transform on it and so on and so forth. And so I think that you're seeing some pretty rapid innovation there, because organizations are able then to kind of sprinkle large language model stuff on top of their existing existing investments. And I think that a lot of the times sales operations functions are saying okay, cool, that may help us unlock better value. So a good example of a call recording, right? The problem historically with call recording is okay, great, now I have a bunch of calls that I have to listen to for my reps. Oh my God, right? Whereas automated summarization is not just valuable for the rep, it's very valuable for the managers as well, right?
Yes.
And so that makes more value capture from conversation intelligence now possible in a way where previously maybe people bought call recording software under the hypothesis that they're really going to have some good call coaching initiatives in place, but it just turns out that whoa, weird, we got busy. Now actually that call coaching is happening because a lot of the post processing is actually happening.
You totally agree. When you have, when you get beyond just a couple of reps, listening to those calls after the fact quickly falls by the wayside, and it's just impossible to do it. So yeah, I think layering on the AI on top of the call capture capabilities, it has really changed the game there, not just for sales leaders and sales ops leaders, but for marketing as well, because they can go in and say, well, what messaging is resonating with our prospects, and who really are the prospects? Who's really taking these phone calls, and how do we get smarter about messaging them? So it propagates across the enterprise as we get smarter and smarter about what our buyers and customers care about. One of the things we do beyond surveys is we talk to a lot of sales reps, and we do sales activity studies, and we collect from them. And I think the general consensus is sales reps are tired of being that sort of armchair integration. They're tired of having 5, 10, 12 systems that they have to enter information in. Each one of those systems has a different interface, a slightly different way to put it in there, and finding information that's possibly scattered amongst all those systems is very difficult. And this problem really gets compounded as the organization grows, or maybe as they do a couple of integrations. Maybe they haven't done a great job of rationalizing their tech stack, and you've got billing information over here and contract information over there and prospect information in a third systems and leads coming from a fourth system. And reps see that and feel that really as a waste of time.
Right.
So we do think that technology and AI can help with that. And so this is probably hard to read, but we surveyed and asked sales and sales operations and revenue operations leaders, what are the challenges for your sales organization when using or considering using AI technologies? And I'll read out the top three that I thought were really important. One is a lack of the skills to implement and operate these systems. And what's interesting here is when you dive into that a little bit, you realize they're not just talking about, how difficult it is to find an AI engineer or, somebody with super analytics powers. You have to train end users how to work with these tools. You think about generative AI. If I have, an AI tool on top of my Salesforce automation platform, and I say, hey, I wake up in the morning, I go, hey, what's important to me today?
Right.
Well, it might look at my calendar and go, oh, you've got a vacation coming up next week, Steve. So you should be off working on your golf swing, right? Instead of, these are the accounts that you need to connect with before you go on vacation, right? And so we as users of these platforms have to learn new ways to ask questions, new ways to interact with them. And that's sort of the subtext underneath that concern. That sort of middle one says poor quality of data. And, I know you guys see this all the time. This old adage of garbage in, garbage out is still true, even if we have large amounts of data. If it's bad data, if it's
large amounts of garbage,
you get
seems like a problem. It would be a problem.
Yeah. And then the third one, the little one up on the top there, is lack of trust of these systems. And I think that's one we're overcoming rapidly amongst sales. And I give a lot of credit to providers of these platforms who aren't leaping in and trying to replace the sales rep. They're trying to help the sales rep. And I'm impressed with the way a lot of the providers are saying, hey, we're going to write, for example, we're going to write the email for you, but we're not just going to send it. We're going to give you a chance to review it. So it's enhancing how reps are working with these platforms, right?
Yeah, I think there's a big learning curve that's happening right now. Where it's just like, how good is it? What can it be relied upon for? What can it not necessarily be relied upon for? Kind of like I tend to kind of think about it like kind of like autonomous driving a little bit. Where it's like under what conditions is it something that you can trust? How far can you trust it, right? Like, should you be taking a nap in your your Tesla S with full self driving on a cross country road trip? Seems risky, right?
Yeah, sure does.
Yeah, but if you're stuck in traffic and it's like 25 miles an hour and it's bumper to bumper, then maybe you can take your hands off, right? And I think that's but the problem here is that's driving, and in this case, there's so many different applications where it's like, oh, okay, cool. This summarizes my call for my consumption. Okay, I can probably trust that more because it's not necessarily customer facing versus the level of scrutiny that would be required in order to, to blindly trust something that's going to be sending an email as an example to a customer or whatever. That seems a little bit more in the cross country drive sort of situation, potentially pretty substantial downside. And I think the problem there is that people are just trying to figure it out, be like, oh, that's this type of that's this AI in this context, I can trust it more, or sorry, I can give you more hands off, I can let it do more, versus oh, this is a high a high nerviosity situation right here, and I have to remember that and not turn off my brain. And I think people are kind of I honestly think it's going to take a year or two for people to just kind of figure out where it works and where it doesn't work, or how much it works. And that'll just take a sec.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great analogy, actually, the self-driving car, because we've had adaptive cruise control for probably, 10 years or so, right? Where it senses the car in front of you and maintains a certain distance. But boy, when that car starts deciding to make a lane change, when that car starts deciding to take this next exit, when it's, it's like, ooh, I don't think I'm quite ready for that yet. But maybe after it's done it 40, 50, 60 times, I'll be a little more trusting.
Yep.
So, yeah. And that kind of leads to the next survey results. And again, I apologize for how the little graphic got distorted, but we do see, and sales leaders, RevOps leaders tell us, there's a lot of potential benefits that they hope will come from applying these AI capabilities onto sales.
I like that number. I like that second one.
Yeah, democratize intelligence and insight across the workforce. Absolutely. And again, it's, for me, that's really, it's doing a couple of things. First of all, it's freeing up sales ops, revenue ops, marketing ops, others from having to maybe do a lot of the analysis and focus on the what is happening question. And they get to focus on, well, why is it happening? And what, if anything, should we do about it? Totally. And those are two higher level functions that AI, at least so far, can't replace. It can absolutely tell us what's happening. Is the pipeline growing? Is it shrinking? Did we win the deal? Did we lose the deal? Are we likely to win the deal? But when it comes to what should we do next, we're still, building those capabilities, and pushing those capabilities down across the organization is absolutely key. The other one's increased revenue growth, of course. As you know from talking to a lot of your customers and through your career, everybody wants to sell to the quote right customer. We want long-term profitability. We want customers that are going to be with us for the long term and have a positive customer life cycle. But we don't always know who they are. And so we default to that instinct, right? Oh, we've been successful selling into the finance industry, so that's our target market. Let's go after them. Well, maybe not. Maybe there are other markets you haven't thought about. So I think helping planners figure out who really are those target markets, how do we acquire, retain, and grow those customers, and do so in a way that's profitable, is where AI and AI-driven analytics can really change the game for us.
Yeah, for sure. What, people like more revenue? Weird.
Yeah.
Shocking.
Yeah. I mean, it's easy to say this is what we think it can do. It's another thing to actually implement, but we're seeing, very, very definitive and positive applications. And in fact, that kind of leads us to this question of, well, where is it being used today? And you can, again, we're analysts. We like to put everything into these buckets so that it makes it.
I like this slide. I like this. I like this framing. I like this conceptual framing. Yes, it's nicely bucketed.
Yeah, but we can be more efficient. We can be more effective as sellers. Make sure we're targeting the right customers. When we do go on a road trip, when we are spending budget, we're meeting with the right people. We're giving them the right message. We're more effective in terms of our execution. We're more informed across the organization, and we're more aligned across the organization, both internally and with our prospects and customers. So just to quickly put a little meat on those bones, and then I think we're actually going to see a little bit about what you guys are doing to emphasize this, right?
A little bit, yeah. Okay. One of the use cases we'll be like, as an example of one of we'll show you how the world slots into Steve's framework.
That's right. Yeah. So a lot of this early capabilities of AI was around efficiency and removing a lot of the manual data entry, not having to log into my CRM platform and manually enter the fact that I made a phone call, or I sent an email, or I connected with a customer, or I accepted a lead. A lot of that is now happening automatically. Things like note taking that you referenced earlier from calls, pulling out, well, what was important and what was talked about. What's the logical next step, the follow-up from that? That's automating forecasting. It's making us smarter about forecasting. It's improving things like content search. And it's also helping us do a better job of presenting an acceptable proposal to a customer. So whether it's responding to an RFP request and automating that process, whether it's generating a contract or generating a quote, those levels of efficiency we've seen some pretty dramatic increases there.
Yeah.
And efficiency is the other side of the coin of effectiveness. So it's not just, oh, it's automating email sending, for example. It's giving us suggestions around what the content should be, what you should attach to it, what is this person interested in, what kind of decision maker are they? Like I said, what's important today. So it's, you know, it's two sides of the same coin.
Hey, buddy, I think that this subject line might be a little more verbose than you're intending here. You know, what we've found is that if you compress it down by this much, you're going to see, you know, this much raise in open rate. You know, you might consider that. You might consider that, buddy. You might consider that, buddy. Oh, thanks, little AI helper. Appreciate it.
Exactly. It's you know, you and I are both old enough to remember Clippy. This is sort of the much more consumable version of Clippy, right? So it's coaching, it's guided coaching, and then the last two are intimately related. We can now, because AI tools are so good at taking vast amounts of data and trend analysis and looking for connectors and, you know, drawing insights out of that. We can learn more about our accounts. We can learn more about the buyers who are involved in those accounts. We can learn more about what our customers need. And by doing that, we can be better aligned both internally across sales, marketing, customer success, product, and externally. We're better aligned with those high potential customers who have a greater probability of buying from us in the first place and then staying with us over the long term. So I thought this was, you know, these are things that we're seeing from vendors today. And I thought this was an interesting way to kind of talk about how AI is impacting sales and sales operations in our current environment.
Yeah, for sure. And I think now I get to talk about one of these buckets, which I think is more, maybe it's a combination of more effective by being more informed.
Yeah.
So, like, I think we're no different than a lot of these organizations where we've been investing pretty heavily. And I'll go ahead and share my screen here. We've been investing in adding generative AI functionality to Atrium. Let's see if I shared this correctly, if I shared the wrong screen. Nope, there it is. All right, there's our fancy AI, you know, robot Fox. But yeah, like essentially, as kind of an example here, one of the things that we found with Atrium was that the biggest kind of challenge that our customers and kind of prospects that we talk to have when it comes to making sure that their managers and leaders are informed, right, and data driven, really is that what we call, like, this is like call it Maslow's hierarchy of data driven sales management. And so it's really up here at the top, right, where you're doing interpretation and comprehension is where things can get really tough. And like this is where the value is created. And so the problem is that the way that organizations have done this historically is by using what I kind of consider like horizontal, like, analyst tools, right? Like reporting and like Tableau and Looker and Salesforce reports and dashboards. Like, those are for analysts, and like the analysts love them and they're good at them, right? And they're not necessarily they're not a vertical tool for like a business person, they're for an analytical person. And so the challenge with that is that, you know, it can be very difficult to interpret that and kind of pull meaning out of it. And so we had done some work around this at Atrium in the prior few years, trying to, like, how could we get people closer to the end zone, right? By instead of saying, hey, go ahead and figure out what's going on in this squiggly line, you know, wall of charts right here. We did, you know, kind of we call it like pre-digesting, where we do statistical analysis on it and say, hey, you know, here's this individual right here, and their win rate is off by this amount as compared to the other, you know, 30 mid-market reps in the team. And so like that kind of helped some, and it unlocked and democratized data-driven management for a bigger group of the market. But you still had a number of folks who were kind of like, okay, now this is a new set of things for me to interpret, and I'm struggling to interpret that. And so this is where AI has come in and been extremely helpful. Is what we can do is we can take these, what we call like facts, right? And feed it to a large language model in order to help with that. There's this kind of like old saying in analytics, there's like the what, the so what, and then the now what, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
what is good, but it's not so what, and it's not now what, right? And so we want to get all the way to the end zone there. And so this is an example here where historically Atrium did a really good job of communicating what, hey, this rep has 40% more stuck opportunities than he usually has at this at this point in a week. In this case, he's got 40% more, right?
Yep.
And so that's not great, right? And for a seasoned sales manager, you might say, oh, okay, cool, I understand why that's not great, and then I might understand maybe some things to do about it. But maybe someone, you might not know all the things to do about it. Or if you're not a seasoned sales manager, you might say okay, what might be causing this, and what should I do about it? And so this is where the AI comes in, is by interpreting that and then providing recommendations on what to potentially do about it. Right. And so this is cool. This is kind of an example. This is our minimum viable version of this that we first started out with 3 months ago. But then we started doing more of it across the kind of other parts of Atrium. So Atrium has this, this functionality called strategy insights, where it's essentially metrics that are moving together in a certain way that indicate a potential root cause. So in this case, this individual has a similar number of bookings as compared to the other reps in his segment at his organization. And it seems that in spite of the fact that he's got a higher ASP, and it seems to be being caused by the fact that he's got 30% fewer new biz opportunities and he's got a longer sales cycle. And so in this case, this is a more complicated set of facts for a manager to then be all right, pop quiz, buddy, what are you going to do about this? Right. And so this right here is this is where the AI sales coach got even better by interpreting that and saying hey, you know what, here are the other opportunities for us to potentially get ahead of this. And then we went further, and then we said, oh, okay, well, maybe we can do this across the entire rep, right, across all their performance. And so like I was saying earlier, our organization, or Atrium, ends up having a set of metrics that are live for a given rep, and then and interpreting that, if that's 3, 5, 10 metrics, can oftentimes, or sorry, anomalies can sometimes be a bit of a lift for managers. What the sales coach will do is it'll look across all of those live alerts, and then interpret what's going on. And it'll look specifically for themes. In this case, this rep right here has a broad theme of lower activity than anticipated, right? He's got a theme of opportunity creation because he's light with respect to opportunity inflow and forward-looking pipe, right? And then lastly, we did the same thing across entire teams. So it just kind of stacks on top of it. So let's say you've got 8 reps, each of whom has 3, 5, 8 things that are potentially going on with them. That's a pretty heavy lift right there in order to interpret all that. You could go to a sales operations manager or analyst and say hey, can you do a teardown for my team? And this is kind of why we only do QBRs once a quarter, because it ends up being a pretty heavy lift in order to interpret what's going on. Whereas in this case, an AI can look across that and give you a quick teardown around. And the way that we've approached that is to say, hey, what are the top areas for coaching on a given AE team or SDR team? What are the areas, what are the positive themes? What are the potentially worrisome themes? Which are the reps that I should be paying attention to, kind of keeping an eye on? Which are the reps that I should be giving high fives to? And then a little bit of a Cliff's Notes analysis on each rep on the team. Hey, here's what's going on with Bob. Here are the things to look out for here. Here's what's going on with Susie. Here are the things to look out for over here. And so what it all kind of comes down to is automating and consistentizing the top of the pyramid here, such that managers don't have to spend their time banging their head against this and giving up and going back to deals. And then similarly, such that revenue operations doesn't have to spend all their time poring over essentially doing the pre-digestion for folks. Instead, what we can do is managers can kind of spend their time actually coaching and changing behaviors for those reps versus trying to fruitlessly detect what's going on there. So that's one example of how we're going about this. And I guess that would kind of pop into your like a combination more informed and more effective there. So like that's just like, you know, that's just one man's approach there, but and I know that there's lots of others, and you've seen, and I'm sure you're on constant briefings on these things, but that's how we're bringing AI to bear in order to help organizations be more effective in selling.
Well, I think that's a very practical application of making sales coaching more relevant, more frequent, and more impactful, right? Yeah. Because we get told again and again and again, and you've seen survey results from us and others that show the coaching that a sales rep receives from their manager, both the frequency and the quality of that coaching, is critically important to their success. And yet they're not getting the level of coaching they need in many cases. And there's a lot of reasons for that, one of which is the manager's not getting the information, the insights they need to do effective coaching. I think this is a great example of how we can take those insights, derive them in a near real-time way, and present them in a way that's very digestible and actually influences those sales activities that we started out talking about, right?
Yeah. Yep.
The other thing we're seeing is that same sort of approach being applied to the sales planning activities. I'm thinking here about territory design, account assignments, compensation design, quota assignment. All of those types of insights are starting to be influenced by a similar type of analysis that really can only be done by some sort of AI engine. So, yeah, that's great. Thank you for sharing that, Pete.
My pleasure. What else do we have to cover here?
Well, just the last little thing, which I thought was maybe both humorous and a little bit frightening. I asked ChatGPT, right? Nothing like asking the AI engine how the AI engine is going to impact B2B sales. So
meta.
There's underneath this, is about a paragraph for each one of these. But I have to say, I really thought the answer was very good.
Solid.
And it's things that it is already doing. It's sort of over on the right-hand side, it's automating processes like data capture and activity capture and pricing and quoting and that kind of stuff. We're getting better leads. We're doing better prospecting because we're sending out more relevant messaging to the right people. We understand more about our buyers and can act upon that understanding. And of course, it's automating forecasting and based on what our customers or buyers are or are not doing. And it's really helping to take chatbots and virtual assistants to a whole new level, and not a moment too soon. I think we're all tired of the little, the pop-up chatbot that just puts you in an endless loop when you're trying to report a problem.
Just give me a form. I'll give you the 7 fields that you care about. But just give me a form, man.
So I thought that was just kind of an interesting little insight into what AI thinks about AI.
I love it. Yeah, I think this is probably about right. Like, I mean, I have the thing I'm kind of struggling to interpret is like, what will be the impact on outbound?
Yes.
So, there's a bunch of really great sales engagement vendors out there. A number of them are kind of Atrium customers right now. And so you can kind of imagine what how this will impact kind of cold outbound, right? And the funny thing is that what I've kind of been of like two minds about this, because people are like, oh, well, like we're just going to be inundated with with automatically written emails, and my response to that is like, well, maybe we'll be inundated by like extremely well executed outbound that like aligns to our needs, and because we've been identified, because we have the leading indicators of a potential need for that solution, then it's explained very well. Like, so you're telling all of a sudden my inbox is going to be overflowing with M&Ms? That doesn't seem like necessarily a bad thing. Like, I get being overflowed with like, to quote my father, like bunny turds versus M&Ms, right? Like, or chocolate chips, right? Like, which of these is which, right? Like, ooh, that was not a chocolate chip, right? But if all of a sudden now it's all chocolate chips, that kind of seems like a win for everyone. I don't know. I'm kind of I'm a little confused as to like it's just like what will come out of that. So I'm very interesting to see like how that actually plays out. But certainly like that's kind of one place where like there will be immediate impact in terms of lead generation and prospecting for sure.
Well, that's a great analogy, and I think the sellers and the providers who are going to win are the ones who spend a lot of time and energy making sure they're sending M&Ms to people who are not allergic to chocolate, right?
Sure.
And
Right.
not just throwing as many bunny turds out there as they possibly can. And
Yeah.
it really comes back to what you talked about at the beginning, Pete. Looking at the expense reports, yes, activity is necessary. Outbound activity is necessary, but do it smart. Mm-hmm. Do it to the right people. Do it to people who are legitimate prospects and who and send them a message that resonates with them. Mm-hmm. And that's just so much better than spamming the world with bunny turds. I'm gonna use that analogy.
We can cite my father, Robert Kazanjy, grumpy aerospace engineer. I think that's actually an aerospace engineering terminology from like late 70s or 80s aerospace community in Southern California. So there you go. Everyone learned something new today.
Yes.
Wonderful. Well, Steve, this was awesome. Thank you so much for putting this. I'm sorry, you didn't put this together for us, but like you put this together, because you do advisory for all these, these highfalutin VPs of RevOps and CROs who are Forrester clients. But it's really nice of you to share this insight with the members of the modern sales community, who obviously are the biggest sales nerds around. So like they're happy to learn at your knee. And if you guys want to find Steve on LinkedIn, give him a follow there. Reach out, say hi. So that way you can be tuned in to all of his insights, throughout the rest of the year as well. So thank you very much, Stephen. For everyone else, please go ahead and stick around for the next relevant session. I don't know what it is off the top of my head because I'm bad, but I'm sure it'll be similarly awesome to Steve's session here. So thank you very much, Steve, and have a great rest of your day. Okay.
Always a pleasure, Pete. Thank you.
Okay. Bye.